All right, hello everybody. Welcome to our webinar from Power to Fly on what works when recruiting women in tech. Super excited about this webinar because I get to show you a number of examples from across top companies and fast-growing startups we've been working with for the last couple of years. I'm going to anonymize all the specific examples from different companies because we obviously don't give away our clients' information. But just to give you a little bit of an idea on the first slide of the sort of caliber of companies that we're working with across the enterprises and across fast-growing startups, we've included some logos down there. So a couple housekeeping notes to get us all started. If you're disconnected, please call in from a landline. You'll be able to find your dial-in number in your audio panel, which is on your GoToMeeting box. All attendees are muted by default, but feel free to chat in the chat window or ask any questions in the questions panel. We're going to get to them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. I'm going to go pretty fast through this webinar because I know a lot of people have questions. If there are any immediate questions around your audio, etc., we have Andrea from the Power to Fly team who's answering questions pertaining to that. But anything that's regarding the presentation or specific to me, we're going to wait till the end to do that. So, meet your moderator. Who am I, and why am I telling you how to create gender diverse pipelines of female tech talent? So, my name is Catherine Zaleski. I am the co-founder and president of Power to Fly. I started out in the media world. I was hire number 6 at Huffington Post. There's a photo of me and my old boss, Ariana, doing a panel last year. I was the executive director of digital at the Washington Post company and the founding managing editor of Now This. I write very frequently for publications like New York Times, Forbes, Fast Company, Fortune, Quartz, specifically around creating more gender diverse pipelines for large and small tech companies. It was actually a New York Times op-ed that I wrote about 2 weeks ago that has spurred this webinar. Got a lot of people asking me for specific advice and solutions around the piece. For a 900-word piece, you obviously can't do that, so we decided to turn it into a webinar. And so here we are. In the last 4 years of co-running Power to Fly, we've now built a database with over 1 million profiles of a woman in tech and across digital. We reach about 12 million women, and the examples that I'm going to run you through today are really around building diverse talent leads through online and also live campaigns since May. When I'm referring to diverse talent leads in this call, I'm talking about underrepresented but over-messaged women in tech primarily. It's very important to understand that these are candidates who are getting a lot of attention, but at the same time, they're still underrepresented across most companies. So let's go on and talk about this challenge that we all share, which is around diversity. Again, one of the reasons I started Power to Fly was I was running large newsrooms. Whenever I wanted to hire tech talent, I could never find enough women in tech. As a woman in the space, it was incredibly frustrating, wanted to fill the job. Really the day before I put the job posting up and found that 99% of my candidates were male. And it was just a constant challenge and I didn't have time for it. And obviously this challenge is becoming more and more of a top priority for talent acquisition leaders, but companies as a whole, especially as they see how gender diversity really increases their productivity. And also their overall performance. So LinkedIn did a study in January, so this month, that came out recently, and the diversity is the top priority for 78% of talent acquisition leaders. So this is a good thing and also a bad thing because it means that the market is tightening. Companies are more and more focused on building gender diverse pipelines, and as a result, attracting diversity candidates is really requiring more and more novel strategies. 3 of the overarching strategies that we constantly refer to at Power to Fly is that you need to feature women in key roles, and that means that you need to showcase senior, mid-level, even junior women in your company. Women want to see it to be it, and I'll show some examples of that. You need to leverage third-party sources is the second novel strategy. So when I'm talking about third-party sources, I'm talking about everywhere from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, to obviously platforms that are giving reviews like Power to Fly and databases. Again, you don't go to a restaurant and ask the restaurant if the food is good. You go to a third-party source to actually check the reviews on that restaurant. So that's super key when you're building gender diverse pipelines. And then the third thing is finding women where they are. Gone are the days where you can say not enough women applied. I talked about how that was my challenge. We built the company around it. You have to be able to start filling your pipelines. If you're not getting towards 50-50 men and women in hiring, you're never going to reach the numbers you want to reach. And you can't say that not enough women are applying. You also need to fight back on that mantra, because women haven't traditionally applied to a lot of these roles because they felt like they don't want to waste their time. In certain cases, we see this a lot. Women will spend weeks trying to get hired by a company, and then they'll get rejected just in the simple fact that they're not a cultural fit, which is also something that we're not accepting anymore in the lexicon. Or they have experiences where they've actually gotten hired by a company, but after a year or two, they realize that there's no way that they can belong there as a caregiver, as a mother, as a parent, et cetera. And so these are experiences that women have been taking with them throughout their careers, and it's really time to sort of fight back on that. And so I'm going to give you some examples and ways to do that as well. So let's go into the agenda quickly here. And so we have about 6 points that we're going to follow up on throughout the presentation. 1 is defining your funnel. 2 is involving hiring managers early and often. 3 is going where the diverse candidates are. And 4 is creating content and jobs that actually convert. 5 is running live and online events. We're running an online event right now, but we'll get into some details around that. And 6 is following up to make hires. All right, so again, what follows are real examples of over 30 campaigns since May 2017 that I'm going to go through. So here we go. All right, step 1, defining your funnel. This is how we start every single campaign at Power to Fly when it comes to building a diverse candidate pipeline. Okay, we build a funnel. And in this slide, you're seeing a funnel that was specific to a hiring campaign that we did about a month ago, where we were aiming to hire at least 3 women who had 10 to 15 years experience in the Phoenix area. And these women were senior development managers. We had to start out at the top of the funnel with over 1,000 women. And the goal here of this campaign was to bring women into the room at a major enterprise company and have them meet the hiring managers. These were senior roles. We really had to focus a lot of attention on these women. We weren't going to be able to just send out a couple emails and say, apply to this job. Again, totally over-messaged women who were sick and tired of hearing messages. They wanted some rhetoric to actually match. They wanted the rhetoric to actually match examples of what it was like to work at the company. So we brought them in for an event. 86 RSVP'd, 54 showed up. You have to be prepared for a lot of drop-off rate between people can't make it for a variety of reasons. This company was able to get 18 offers out almost immediately because they pre-qualified the list. And then they made 3 hires that was within the week after the event. So that's the kind of effort that you need to put into creating a funnel, and you need to work the numbers backwards. Obviously, we're continuously trying to tighten that funnel, make the top bit smaller so we don't have to message so many women. But that's just a real life example of the challenges that come with making these hires. So the key here is really defining your funnel. The problem that we see with creating funnels is that companies are often focused on the wrong type of talent. They only want the active skilled talent. They're completely ignoring the 3 other talent categories that can really build your diverse candidate pipeline, which are active unskilled, passive skilled, and passive unskilled. And you can read through these slides later. But the idea here is that you really want talent that is filling into all these 4 categories. So you're only going to if you're only going to take people that are filling in one type of of category, then you're going to miss out on a huge amount of people. So in order to really focus on these 4 categories and be able to broaden your funnel at the top, you have to continuously focus on defining your funnel, which I go into in the next slide. And that starts with actually focusing on roles and not job descriptions. So this is a bit complicated, and I just want to be super clear on this. So I have a couple slides dedicated to it. But the reason we focus on roles and not job descriptions is because, first of all, good talent doesn't want to move laterally. 60% of companies are focused on filling roles that they have today. They're failing to meet the potential to bring in a high quality match for their organization that's apart from the job. And also, you have to look at this idea that having skills of a talent matching the skills of a job description is really actually pushing women away, because when the stats show that men apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, and women apply only if they meet 100% of the qualifications, you can see the drop off right there. So we're really trying to message differently to women as well, that they should feel comfortable making moves that simply aren't lateral because they're matching job descriptions. Now, the key here, though, is that you do need a job description to start your Boolean searches when you're putting together your list that you're going to target, right? So in the next slide, I have a very sort of wonky slide about a narrow versus broad Boolean search, which you're also welcome to go back to and dig into a little bit more. But you notice here that we have a narrow example, which is pushing a lot of candidates out of the top of your funnel, and then we have a broader one that focuses on those 4 categories that I touched on earlier in the 2 slides ago. Okay, great. Let's move on to step number 2, involving hiring managers. I put this really early in the presentation because I can't stress how important it is to have that connection between hiring managers and talent acquisition and recruiting. We can go to the next slide. We see over and over again that there is a misalignment between the candidates that recruiters are bringing in and ultimately who hiring managers are making decisions on. Part of it is we're trying to get talent acquisition teams to be able to message to their hiring managers this concept of filling roles based on roles and not job descriptions, but also sort of being very, very clear about who's filling your role. It on average takes 90 days to fill a role. If you keep changing up the requirements around that role, you're going to have a huge problem filling that pipeline that we started out with. This is especially important, when you're putting together these over-messaged candidate pipelines of diverse candidates. So sit down with your hiring manager, ask what their ultimate goals are, talk to them about people being trained up, and start pushing back on rejections that you get. I mean, we often see rejections around resume gaps not being explained. Resume gaps tend to be more frequent when you're dealing with non-white men. You are dealing with a population that has predominantly been caregivers in relationships, and so you need to dig into that a little bit and not penalize women as a result of that. This is especially true with older, more experienced women as well. Push back on the term cultural fit. I mean, I think that should be completely banned from any hiring lexicon. And I was excited to see that LinkedIn did a study that they also released in January on where traditional interviews fail. They surveyed over 9,000 clients, and they found that 63% of them were completely failing on the soft skills part because they were assuming that attractive and charismatic interviewees were more capable when they weren't. Those people were churning very quickly as employees. So it's super important to get the hiring managers in the process in day one. I have a note in here about having hiring managers meet women, not resumes. We like to have hiring managers at all our events to show their faces, even on live webinars. Again, we were trying to explain gaps in the resume, et cetera, trying to sort of paint the picture on a whole person, and again, not just a list of skills. So let's move on to step 3, going where the candidates are. Okay, so going where the candidates are. I have drawn a very crude map of what the internet looks like to power to fly here, but you can see that, with even a company that has over 1 million profiles on its platform, we still spend the vast majority of our time building up client candidate lists on the social and mobile web. So we've reached over 12 million users, and we do that through newsletters, cross social. Obviously, we have a blog and we do targeted search. I can't stress how important it is to have a targeted newsletter for your potential candidates. A lot of people say, well, why would I put together a newsletter? Why would I put the effort into something if I'm not hiring? I want people, even who are passively hiring, to consider doing these activities. Keeping a warm list is just super, super key. Even if you don't have this particular job opening, and you should constantly be sort of updating that and thinking about that. Social, you should always be thinking about how you're messaging to these potential candidates, and we'll go into details about that. And then a blog about what it's like to work at your company. Again, this concept of seeing it to be it is really important. So just to give you an example of how specific we get around finding candidates across the mobile and social web, our next slide has some examples around a specific campaign. This is a campaign that we did around a senior developer that we ran across Instagram, Facebook, obviously Twitter, all the usual places. And then email was a huge referrer for us. So, the whole goal here is that we've learned that these candidates that you're looking for, they're also not spending a huge amount of time across on the usual platforms where you're hiring. They want to be met with content in locations where they actively are on the social web. That's why we have one person who spends a lot of time in Facebook groups, building up relationships with those groups and posting different opportunities. We did an event with a major company recently. 56 of the RSVPs for a 200-person list came just from Facebook groups. So that's why it's so important to really think about your strategy, what kind of groups you're in, LinkedIn groups as well. And when you're thinking about email campaigns as well, what's the material that you're using to drive more emails? Do you have referring campaigns, etc.? So that's super key. I'm going to give you some ideas in the next slide on content that converts. But first, I want to talk about pathing. If you're going to put together a content plan, you really need to think about always driving it back to your jobs pages, obviously. This is just an example of a campaign plan that we ran for a company. Recently, we were able to increase their application pool by 750%, and they were able to also hire 7 women in 6 weeks. The goal of the content was to drive the women to the jobs, to engage the women on the different jobs pages, to circle back to keep the loop really, really tight. As you can see, we started on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. We didn't just rely on people coming to our site. The next slide here just makes that even clearer. You really have to define your path to your jobs. And so you do that, again, by engaging them with content that converts. The key for content that converts is it should be transparent. You really need a voice from your company speaking about what it's like to work at that company and why she's thriving there and not just surviving. So we're going to show an example from a woman who's at Dow Jones, and she was hired at 9 months pregnant at Dow Jones. It's like a 1.5 minute video, and we'll play it right now. Here we go. Let's give it like 30 more seconds, and then you can also download it. Oh, here we go. Sorry about that, guys. We'll send that as a separate item, but I'll just give you the backstory on it. She was hired at 9 months pregnant by Dow Jones. When I was interviewing her, she's pregnant with her second child. The response to this video has been tremendous. Not only did the woman in this video, Mona, who runs an engineering team out of New York, but also Minneapolis, get a huge amount of personal responses. Let's just go to the next slide here. But we were able to drive campaigns across multiple platforms that were incredibly successful. I'm just showing you an example on this slide of an organic campaign that I started last Friday that drove almost 15,000 views. There was no money behind that campaign. Literally posted on my LinkedIn with the headline that she was hired at 9 months pregnant, and it was shared like crazy. And then we were also able to run it as an email campaign to a lot of the passive candidates who were looking for jobs in the Minneapolis and also New York and LA area, which is where this woman is running teams and trying to hire more candidates. So that's just a great example of content that really sells. You don't need fancy production value for this. I mean, we will make videos for people, for companies, and then actually do the outreach and drive the traffic around it. But we're even experimenting with tools like Soapbox and ways that you can just sort of do your own video recordings and send them out to candidates. I mean, the key here again is the transparency and being able to tell these stories. Another great place to tell stories are events, live and online, and share best practices and live webinars like we're doing right now. Get a roundtable of women in tech to talk about their experiences, and we've definitely done that. And had live Q&As, which has been super successful, and then also live events. So the next this example here is of a live event that we recently did for 5 open roles in a location. You can see sort of how we broke down the challenges, the solution, the implementation. The key with a live event like this is when you're designing the invitation, no matter what tool you're using, Eventbrite or other tools, ask people if they actually want to work at your company. And you want to start pre-qualifying those candidates too. So we don't wait till the women actually get through the door. We often work the list before the event happens, and we ask them if they're interested in a job. You'd be surprised actually how the intent rate changes throughout the process. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not interested in working at that company. And we'll say, well, why don't you come and actually meet other women who are working at that company first before you decide? And we're able to change people's minds pretty quickly. So it's really exciting. And but we always ask, are you interested in working at this company, to get a good gauge of how we need to work the pipeline. And we also give the invitee list over to the hiring managers about a week beforehand so that they can identify who they want to talk to. So this slide here that you're seeing really breaks down the goals again of how we run events. And this was a slightly different pipeline than the one I started out with, but you start out with the content, the invitation. We do at least 7 to 8 emails to get women in the room for events. It sounds crazy, but that's what you need to do. I mean, that's what sales, right? You need to send people at least 7 emails on average to get them to open your sales pitch. So same with events. And a lot of women are very grateful by the 7th email. They say, oh, I missed the first couple ones, or, so targeted outreach is obviously really important. We don't fill rooms with people who don't match the roles we're trying to fill, right? So if we want senior development managers, that's who's in the room. If we want UI, UX, that's who we invite. So it's really key there. And again, we work that list like crazy. The next slide just shows a sample event agenda that we ran. I do have specifically Amazon in here because the invitation was public. You can see it on our site. This was for Amazon. And the great thing about this is it really turned into a wonderful conversation about what it's like to work at Amazon. And we're running we're doing a very similar event for them next week in Seattle. I'm sorry, the 6th of February, so in 2 weeks in Seattle, and another one in March, because these are really just great open dialogues between senior women at Amazon and then women in the Seattle area. And we're seeing some really, really strong conversions around on that. And just the simple idea of getting women to come to the company, serving some light food, some drinks, nothing fancy. It's all about having that conversation that goes beyond the headlines. The next example is just this is actually a sales example, so it's not around tech. We do a lot of non-tech as well. Senior women in sales. This is like a really small webinar that we did. It literally had 15 people on it, I think, and super senior women in sales. And it was a knowledge sharing webinar, but after it, women who weren't actually interested in the company, and I redacted the company obviously, but a huge enterprise sales company, told us that they were actually really interested in working there. So because a senior, the general manager of an entire region, a man, he got on the phone, he answered questions for an hour, and he was the hiring manager. He was the guy that they were going to work with. So they really felt connected to the company, and we've had some great success there as well. And that was like a pretty low impact. I mean, the hard work there was getting the right woman to the panel. But on the company side, you just basically showed up and answered the questions. So start getting your questions ready, because I only have about a couple more slides. It's only going to get to slide 7, and that's the end. Okay, making hires. How do you make your hires? Okay, so again, I talked about this idea of having a pre and post campaign plan. So always staying on top of your list. If you're doing a live event, you're doing a webinar, pre-qualify. Ask people, reach out to these women beforehand, before they even get your company, and say, are you interested in working with us? If you even want to run interviews before the event, that's a great way to tie the two together. Run the interview, then invite her to the event. You got to huddle with the hiring managers beforehand and have them in the room. I'm trying to put together some very positive examples on this list, but in this webinar, but we did an event out in San Francisco a couple months ago where the company put a lot of energy into getting all these women in the room, but none of the hiring managers stayed. It was only the recruiting team that stayed, and it sent a terrible message to the women who came. And it also, as a result, the hiring managers, the next day, they were only able to evaluate women based on the resumes that they were seeing and the profiles. They didn't have any sort of data on women they had talked with. So the best thing to do is to huddle with your hiring manager before an event. Give them a form. I've seen this work really, really well, an evaluation form where you're all evaluating the candidates in the same stuff. Create a Slack channel, et cetera. Designate one person from talent acquisition to follow up with all those candidates the next day. But the idea is that first you give them the list of candidates. They identify the people that they want to talk to at the event. Then you have a shared form. Then you huddle with them all after the event, and you decide exactly who you're going to go and talk to the next day. Because again, if you're in one of these major cities like New York, Seattle, San Francisco, the competition is so fierce for these diverse candidates. You've got to hit the ground running the next day. And so that's why it's so key to align on who you have in the room, and then set up phone screens or even text these women the next day. We did an event out in, we did a campaign out in Austin last week. They're texting the women. The women are loving it. They actually feel like, this is the first time they've been able to really connect with a company that also spoke very clearly about their gender diversity initiative goals. They met women from the company. Like, they wanted the follow-up at that point. Another key thing, and this is like a whole other webinar, but when you actually are starting the interview process, just make sure your interview panel is diverse. There's nothing more off-putting than going into an interview and not seeing anybody at the company who reflects your experiences. So that's really important. And again, a whole other ball of yarn that we can talk about later. And then get the offers out stat. If you're dealing with those 4 categories that I started talking about in the funnel, you really want to make sure that you're being fast. So, and if you're passively hiring, again, you got to keep that pipeline warm and message up with more content. We always write a quick blog if we do any events or even webinars with sort of the key points. People love that. Surveys, keeping talent warm is really, really important. So we've gotten to the summary slide now, and I'm just going to wrap things up really quickly for people. So, we all know that creating diverse pipelines is a universal challenge. Solutions exist. That's why we started this company. It's a big challenge, and we're getting there. But in order to get there, you need to really apply a number of the tactics that we just talked about. So the first thing is to really focus on what your organization needs and not just matching skills with skills on job descriptions. So again, this idea of roles, not job descriptions. But remember the caveat I said about Boolean searches helping you with the job descriptions do help inform those at first. Involve your hiring managers from day one. You can no longer blame recruiting because hiring managers make the decisions. And that really, and you also have to get on the same page with hiring managers about making sure that they're in sync with the roles that you've been asked to fill. And also, what sort of the expectations are. Go where women are. Again, they're not going to come to you. And you got to create the open and transparent content once you actually get to them, and create the path to your role so you can track it. And then I'm going to finish up by saying that you need to follow up with candidates immediately. Again, super important. Can't stress that enough. And that also starts with showing your face. We want men as part of this conversation just as much as women, and it's so important to have them at these live events, but also online. So right before I take questions, I'm just going to tell you all that we are here. If you have any questions, email answers@powertofly.com. Either myself or the team will get back to you. This is just a map of women that we have across the globe. We ran this on Friday, so you can see the concentration is primarily in the US and these major cities. That's also where our team is. We're all over the place, really trying to represent these underrepresented women across America, so to speak, and doing stuff in all the major cities, but also in some of the smaller ones. So with that, I will look at my question panel and take some questions. I'll give everybody a second to start filling it in, but let's see. I know there are a lot of people on this call, so I'm excited. Come at me. Oh, is I in the right pane? Oh, here I am. Sorry. Okay. Jane Elizabeth. Sorry. How are you, Jane Elizabeth? Do you work at all with retention? Any advice on keeping these great people after they are hired? That's a great question. Do we work at all with retention? We are surveying more. Well, to answer your question, one of the ways that we don't have specific retention packages right now, but it's something I really want to develop. And one of the ways that we actually increase retention is that when we're having these dialogues with companies around how they're creating more inclusive environments, because no one company is perfect, right? Everybody's evolving and adapting. We will go back and ask women if it's what we're actually hearing about the company is true, and that will actually allow us to then recommend these companies more to other women. So we're trying to hold companies' feet to the fire on that, because the number one issue we see with retention is with women not feeling like they belong there, and that's sort of the highest rate of churn. So we really, really try to focus on that. We also try to nip that in the bud in the interview process. I think I spoke in my New York Times article about a hiring manager who pushed back, who we had to push back on because a woman asked if she could go and pick up a kid, like once or twice a week. And he said, this isn't a 9-to-5 organization. She never was saying that in the first place, but he was sending a very clear message that even if she did get hired there, she would probably churn because she didn't feel like she belonged as a caregiver. And they took that message very loud and clear, and we are continuing to work with them, and the interviews have gone a lot better now. And his his manager actually talked to him about being more fluid on the flexibility front, especially when it comes to hiring women of her caliber. Let's see, Dennis. Okay, what about startup hires? You don't have 3 months to fill roles and must go to the best of what you can get. Go for the remote position instead of local. So my advice to startups is really to go for remote. It is a much, much faster way to hire. And obviously people I've worked at now like 3 startups. And so Power to Fly is almost primarily remote. We're able to hire super fast. Sometimes in most cases, we hire full time with about a 90-day trial window, and then, but we'll also start out some positions on contract if we're pursuing a new project, et cetera. So that's a way for us to move fast. My previous company, Now This, was all in New York, and the way to avoid the 3-month, the 90-day problem that you're constantly getting is to create that passive funnel that I was talking about and create your list so that you can constantly be reaching out to candidates as positions open up. And we actually are able to fill roles much faster with the strategies that I told you about, so really under 60 days. But you have to, a lot of it is keeping a warm lead list and making that bigger and bigger. So what's this one? Have you observed any difference in pipeline diversity when an open position is remote versus on-site? Yeah, big time. I mean, we have a lot more, it's a lot easier to fill a remote job with diverse talent, especially gender diverse talent, and especially women of a certain age range. And that, obviously changes throughout a woman's career, but I will tell you from personal experience, like I had a kid 4 years ago, and so I really needed a remote position for about, 6 to 9 months. Now I actually can't wait to get out of the house. I am about to have another kid, so that'll change again. But I think part of the problem is that people focus too much on employees just wanting to be remote forever or just wanting to be in office. And it's more about creating an office plan where it's more flexible around the needs of your employees. If you're going to build up a really strong employee base, you have to understand that employees have different location needs around different times. I mean, like I said, the last 2 years, I'm like dying to get out of the house and be in an office. So it completely, it changes. And that's what has enabled me to keep working. So you said to involve senior women in the company in the process, but what if you are a small startup and need to hire the first woman for a new group? I'd be transparent, that's what happens. Like, I'd be transparent about the fact that, that you're a new company, and you're obviously, you're looking to diversify the team because you feel like you'll have a much more powerful team. And there's a lot of women that'll be happy to take that on. But the first stride is hard, and it only gets harder, I've seen, with companies that have grown to 50 people where the gender diversity is just absolutely terrible, and then you really have problems convincing people. So if you're small, you can be super transparent in the early days about your goals, and people really appreciate that. But don't wait too long. Let's see. What else do we stand? How can we stand out when communicating with top women in tech? That's another great question. So how do you stand out when communicating with top women in tech? The way to stand out is, again, to embrace a message which doesn't pretend to be that your company is perfect, because nobody's perfect, but to talk about the challenges you're facing and also what you're doing to rectify them, and try to have women, obviously, that are speaking to these challenges. It's really key not to give people sort of this salesy pitch that like, oh, we're perfect and we have great, we have, this great package and that great package. It's more around the evolution of a company as the people of the company change and you grow, and you're developing. And so, people really like to sort of look at the path of a company and understand that. I mean, I've written very, very popular pieces where people have wanted to read about the journey and how that can really help them understand why they would want to join a company that's on a journey that's improving versus one that's trying to claim that it's so great. I mean, everybody can sniff that out. Slightly vague answer there, but it was a rather broad question. So, great. Do we have any more questions here? So we have 3 more minutes left. So I want to keep everything under time. I said I would respect everybody's time by getting to 3:45. So if not, I gave everybody where to reach us at answersofpowertofly.com. We will also send out a link where you can download the webinar and send the link to other people to download it as well. And my goal is to do more of these where I break out more specific examples, because this was a rather broad sort of this is a broad survey of a lot of different tactics that we're working on right now. But please let us know what you think. And thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Okay, bye-bye.